Welcome to Tuesdays with Gary. My name is Gary Lanham, and I am the team leader of the Gary Lanham Group at Caldwell Banker, Fort Lauderdale Beach office. And today we're really excited to have a program today to talk about the data, what's driving the data, and most importantly, to have a person that I look up to who's my mentor, my friend, Nancy Corey, who's the Regional Vice President of Coldwell Banker Southeast Florida. So I want to give you a little introduction about Nancy. She's been in the real estate business practically all her life. She comes from a very famous real estate family. And without further ado, let me introduce Nancy.
Good afternoon, Gary. It's really a pleasure to be here. I actually have been, my entire career has been in real estate. And it's a real pleasure, Gary. I am a huge fan of yours. You're just a big believer in education and spreading the wealth, and you feel so strongly about giving back to your community. I'm very impressed, very impressed.
Well, Nancy, we're so happy that you're here with us today because you know the data. You manage 19 offices in the Tri-County area, and you understand what's going on in all of Southeast Florida. And before we get to the data, I want to just kind of give an intro on what's going on right now in Southeast Florida. So we know that we have historically low mortgage rates. We know that the US dollar is falling in value. We know that compared to other areas of the country, we have lower property taxes. We have no state income tax. We have certainly larger and greater square foot living patterns. And we also see now a lessening COVID-19 outbreaks. They're easing. And basically, not only are they easing, we're learning how to care for those folks better. And we know that we have economic diversity here. And we know that when we get rid of COVID, that there'll be more opportunities for both the travel, the tourists, and of course, we've got the beaches here. So Nancy, what are you seeing in the marketplace? What's going on for Caldwell Banker Southeast Florida?
Well, I will tell you, I'm very impressed with how adaptable not only are the real estate professionals, because look at the platform we're working on today, where we can be in two different places and still be communicating and talking about the market. So the resiliency of the real estate professionals is impressive, but even more impressive is to watch how fast the consumers are adapting as well. So we've got a lot of different changes going on in the marketplace, but the consumers are learning how to live in a new environment, and real estate professionals are learning how to work and effectively service their clients in an unusual environment. So Southeast Florida is very, very dynamic. Would you like to go to the slides, Gary?
Love to see the slides, Nancy.
Okay, great. The first one that comes up is going to be in Broward County. So the Broward County overview is going to be exactly what's going on in the entire county, which is very interesting. So let me explain to you the statistics that I decided to bring to your show today. If you look at this top blue line, there's a light blue line that's trending downward. You can see starting in about March or April, those bars are coming down. That's the total inventory in the market. So you can see that the inventory is at the lowest levels that it has been in the year 2020. What's interesting on the bottom, and what I look at more than anything else in the marketplace, is properties that have gone under contract. We call them pending sales in the industry. So if you look at the properties that have gone under contract, you can see that they're moving up at a pretty healthy rate there, Gary, because particularly August has not yet closed out. So you're going to see the bar in August go up. So you can also see that for the year 2020, these properties going under contract are actually moving at a pretty significant rate, and they're higher in August than they have been any other month of the year.
So Nancy, let's talk about that for a minute, because
Sure.
I think there are a couple of things in this chart that I think that the consumer should be aware of. If you look at January 2020, for example, and then February 2020, that contract rate was going up very high. And then all of a sudden in March and April, we had the shutdown, COVID appeared. And then we came out of the shutdown at the end of April, and we see May rising. And of course, these are contracts not closing. In June, all of a sudden, we're back pretty much above normal. July, we're above normal. And August, we're above normal. Is that what you're seeing consistently in each of your markets?
Yeah, I think it's really important because you can see the precipitous decline that is directly related to the pandemic. So that's that little dip that happened right in the middle of the year. So I do think it's significant. If you can go back to the chart, I also want to point out the blue area in the center of the chart. And this is very consistent in Southeast Florida. So if you're looking at those blue bars, the blue bars are the total inventory. And we consistently have that very large number of properties that actually stay on the market. And then you can see the activity of the market based on the lower level, which is the dark blue bars. You can see that that's where the action is going on in the marketplace. And then you see a pretty significant amount of inventory that actually isn't going anywhere. So what is interesting is the merging of those two lines, because as the inventory continues to go down and the number of contracts being placed on the property continues to go up, that's when you're going to see an interesting potential change in the market.
That's a really interesting slide because Broward's not Miami, and Broward doesn't necessarily have as many discretionary sellers. So basically what that tells me as a realtor that we've got a lot of properties still way overpriced.
You're right. And you're very astute, Gary, because we will have a slide later on that will show you a market where that's very, very apparent. So let's take a look at the next slide so we can actually look at some of the numbers and the figures that are important. I know that your team and you in particular are very in tune with the data, and that's critically important because if I were a seller in today's marketplace, I would want to know that my agent really understood what was going on in the marketplace. And this is where you're going to find out what that data is. I noticed that you highlighted the number of properties that what we call expired, which basically failed on the market. So there were 1,400 properties in the month of August that failed on the marketplace. Now they failed because their pricing doesn't match the demands of the consumer, what the consumer is interested in buying. And that's why watching contract pendings versus contracts that have closed, because a contract that closed is old history. That's a buyer that was looking 30, 60, 90, possibly 9 months ago. They went under contract potentially 30, 45 days ago, and they're just now closing. So that's why I always look at the properties that are going under contract now, because that tells you exactly what the buyer is interested in. Now, when you look at
that makes really good sense. Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
It is. It's critically important because everybody looks at closing. Certainly the appraisers do. But when you think about closings, Gary, that's ancient history. You know, that's information that's at least 30 to 45 days old. Now, the next slide, I think, is a really good example of a unique market that has a little bit of a different picture. Because as you recall,
Coral Springs, yeah, for sure.
Amazing, right? In the last slide, you saw a slight little decline, looked a little bit more normal. This happens to be the Coral Springs market. And look at how dramatic what's occurring in the Coral Springs market is having. You don't have as much blue in Coral Springs as you did in Broward County as a whole. And you certainly see some aggressive properties going under contract. And take a look at the next slide, because this is an area that would be very important for a seller to know and a buyer. There's only 1.4 months of inventory left in that marketplace. So if you were looking to sell your property, now is the best time to sell in Coral Springs without question. And of course, if you're a buyer, you better hurry up because chances are you're going to be in a multiple offer situation. Now, as more properties come on the market, some of those dynamics will change. And as with everything, Gary, I know that your team drills down to specific subdivisions because just because this is occurring in the general market in Coral Springs doesn't mean it's happening right in your neighborhood. So I know your team drills down to the specifics in the neighborhood. And I, as a customer, would really want to know that information to make sure I have the correct information for what I'm trying to do, whether it's selling or buying.
We have a couple of really good examples. My star agent, Eileen Mulkey, has been doing a lot of business in Coral Springs. And as you know, she's a Fannie Mae appraiser. She's a forensic Fannie Mae appraiser. So she understands the numbers. And she's had a couple of deals over there. And basically, we'll have to go back and take a look at the list price to sale price ratio. But in each situation that she's been involved with, she's either had to go match list price or go slightly above the list price to actually secure the property, because it's just impossible. You have to be aggressive. You have to be ready. You got to be ready to pounce now. And then you still may be competing with somebody, but that's a good demonstration of that market, of how nimble you actually have to be.
I agree. And also, Gary, you know, I know that you know, and certainly I've known for years, that the marker for a change in the market is 6 months of inventory for 6 months or more. When you get under 6 months of inventory for 6 months or more, you're trending into a seller's market. And that's simply supply and demand. The lower the inventory, the better shot the owner has of getting a higher price. So watching the months of inventory the way that you do will give a very clear picture to either the seller who is interested in selling or a buyer who's engaged in buying, to know exactly what's going on in that specific market as they approach it. Now, the next slide talks about Fort Lauderdale in general. And of course, Fort Lauderdale is enormous, but it's also worth taking a look at that one so we can see the difference between Broward County in general and then Coral Springs. You see the difference here, larger amount.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, in the center of it, but you're still seeing that trend, that upward trend down on the bottom where the properties are going under contract. And you can see that absolute trend of the inventory going down. But because it's a larger metropolitan area, obviously there's a lot more properties that are in the mix, but you're still looking at the same type of data. Let's look at the next slide and let's see what's going on with the months of inventory. Now, the months of inventory there are still above the 6 months. And when you look at it over the entire year, it's gone up at 8.2. That was in the middle of the pandemic. 11, right. That's still, a result of that. And since this month isn't completely closed out, we're still pretty comfortably, above the 6 months, but pretty close, especially because we're going to see another market that has significantly higher months of inventory, and we'll chat about that. But it's important to watch this because if it does drop under 6 months and stays at under 6 months of inventory for 6 months, you're looking at a trend and you're looking at a potential change in the market.
You've got another interesting number displayed here, Nancy, too, if we can go back to that slide. So if you look right underneath that red mark, it talks about the sale price, the list price ratio. And I noticed in the Coral Springs, it was like 98%. And in Fort Lauderdale, you've got it at 95.5%. Now, I would challenge, this is why it's so important to understand data and to make sure the realtor understands their neighborhoods, because I would say there are some neighborhoods in Fort Lauderdale and its environs, whether it be Oakland Park or Wilton Manors, where you may be closer to that 98% or even 100% of list price to sale price ratio. So this is an amalgamation, and still at 95%, that gives the realtor a clue on how to list a property as far as comparing like comparables, looking at your list price to sale ratio, and adding that 5% to the price. But basically, if we look also at the days on market, we're seeing in Fort Lauderdale that they are actually coming down too. Again, I see that 99-day marker in the northeast side of Fort Lauderdale. Our properties literally go into contract in less than 15 days. It's just because the demand simply is there.
I agree. I also think it's important with the list price to sale price ratio, because you're absolutely spot on to remember that that's the last price that the property was listed at. So if the property isn't moving and it's not within the strike zone of what the buyer is interested in, then the 95% isn't going to matter. You're going to land up in that expired group, the did not sell group. So that 95% ratio is a well-priced property that's right in the strike zone of what a buyer is looking for. And the expertise of a realtor to help you guide that person into that zone is what's so critical. And that's why you need this information, and you need someone to really, explore the data to help you set that price.
So Nancy, let's dive into the strike zone a little bit, because that's probably an unfamiliar term to most consumers. Can you explain how you get to the strike zone and what that looks like on paper to the buyer?
Okay, great. The strike zone to me is where the buyers are purchasing. A lot of people don't want to look at that data because the buyer is interested in the property, and let's just suppose that property is listed for $425,000. We actually don't know what they put as a contract or an offer on that property. But what we know for sure is that the buyer is looking at that $425,000 price range. They're looking at the number of bedrooms, the baths, the square footage. That is what's attractive right now and today to the buyers. So when the seller is looking at evaluating their property, they should be asking their realtor, what is the strike zone? Where are the buyers hitting? And then they also need to very carefully look at the properties that failed on the market. We call them expired listings. But when a property doesn't sell and it fails on the market, it's important for the seller to know what types of properties were failing, what price ranges are failing, which ones are not attracting the attention of the buyer. And then when you're looking at the listing inventory, that's also very confusing for a consumer, for a seller, because the seller is saying, well, listen, that property is listed for $450,000. And an educated realtor would say, well, that's great, Nancy, but Nancy's seller, unfortunately, that property has been on the market now for well over 6 months, and it hasn't gone under contract during that 6 months. So that's stale inventory, that's dated inventory, that's inventory that has been rejected by the buyer, and that's that blue zone we were talking about.
Right, that's that blue zone. Well, with the velocity of the market now, it's like we're primarily listing agents. I have some buyers agents on my team, but in the past, I didn't care. I wasn't so interested in the pending sale information because it hadn't closed. But now, because the market is moving so daggone rapid fire fast, I bring that pending sale data to say, this is where you got to be if you want to sell your house.
And where you don't want to be is that terrible group of properties. I think we saw one that was as high as 2,100 that did not sell. That is not where you want to be. So the seller should be looking at the properties that failed on the market because they don't want to be one of them.
So
I think our next, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you got your Miami slides coming, right?
Right. Yeah, we're moving into Miami-Dade County. So the next slide shows what's going on in Miami-Dade County. It's a little bit of a different picture. I think we need to go up one. And that one is also because of the size of the market. You still have a very significant blue center to it, but you have a good decline in the inventory on the top. We're at the lowest point of the inventory for the entire year. And you can see that the pending sales are going up. Remember that that last little blue line there is August, and that has not yet been finalized. So we're anticipating that that's going to be up high too. So right. Once again, you're seeing a very similar trend in Miami-Dade County as you are in Fort Lauderdale. Let's take a look at the data sheet, which is the next one. And then once again, this one's very interesting because one of the things you pointed out, because that's your nice little red arrow there, you said more houses are failing on the market that are selling because 1,900 sold and 2,100 failed on the market. That has a lot to do with what you were talking about before, which is discretionary ownership. So if we go back to, actually, let's move forward to Miami Beach because boy, can you see it in Miami Beach. In Miami Beach, you see that little ocean.
Oh, yeah.
If you looked at that, you wouldn't really understand what was going on in Miami Beach because why is there so much unsold inventory that's sitting on the market? That's the discretionary market you were referring to before because there's a lot of vacation ownership in Miami Beach, people from out of the country that own them. If they sell them, they sell them. If they don't, they don't. And if you don't have a true analysis of the marketplace and really understand what's going on with that lower dark blue line and the higher light blue line, you could get fooled by the market because you would think that this might in fact be, a very slick, fast market for you if you were a buyer because there's so much inventory when in fact it's not. Because well-priced properties are moving very quickly on Miami Beach. So if you don't understand the data and you can't interpret the data correctly, you could make a mistake. So a very similar trend that's going on with Miami Beach as in other places, just a little bit different because of the discretionary ownership in that particular market.
That's an amazing slide, and when I see that big those large blue lines, I think, well, those are rich people. They don't need to sell, or those are people that don't work with a realtor that know how to price.
There you go. Let's go to the next slide because I think what's also very interesting in Miami Beach and some of these other markets is
look at your supply.
Yeah, and you're well, it's a massive months of supply, but once again, that's discretionary ownership. So somebody could misread that and not really understand what's going on in Miami Beach. In addition to that, we're seeing very, very fast movement in the uber high end of the marketplace, which is fueled, as you had suggested at the beginning of your program, is our preferential tax treatment here in Florida. We do not income tax. So we are drawing in from the Northeast, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, Chicago, and interestingly enough, a very large pull from California, with the unfortunate problem they're having with the fires. They do have some issues with schools and strikes that are going on out there. And, the high cost of living in California, when they come here to Florida, they get a lot of those same advantages, but certainly compared to the Northeast and certainly compared to California, we have excellent prices down here, especially in the very, very high end, where you can be on a waterfront property for prices that they haven't seen in California in decades. So we're still considered a very good, well-priced market. And if you're in the very, very high-end market, it's very competitive right now, very competitive.
So, and that's not even to mention the California income taxes and the various taxes in the city, because that's a huge sum to pay just to live in California.
Exactly. And, when people realize how much money they save, because it's not just the income tax, that's great. But remember that the tax law changed and now we're capped out at $10,000 that we can deduct on the property taxes. So if you have a really high-end property, you're not staying there anymore, because one of the advantages you had was deducting your huge tax bill. Now that you don't get to deduct that huge tax bill and it's only $10,000, why not live in Florida?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So Nancy, with this kind of data and this kind of velocity of the market, what are you seeing some of the best practices? As I'm going to take it as a two-pronged question. What are you seeing as some of the best practice for listing agents right now?
I think really good listing agents understand the value of really showcasing the property, because we have more eyes on the internet than I have ever seen since the internet became a major factor in selling real estate. So what I see your group doing and what I see the high-end professionals doing is making sure that their photography is excellent, making sure that they do videography on the property. A lot of them are using three-dimensional which, the industry word is Matterport. That's like Kleenex for facial tissue.
Right.
Yeah, they're doing those interactive floor plans because they have to be able to visualize it extremely well for the consumer. I also see your group out all the time on Facebook Live, where you're actually taking the consumer right into the property live. Even little, personal videos, are out there and working. So, we're just doing business a little bit differently than we were before. And as I mentioned earlier on the program, the adaptation of the real estate professional has been remarkable. I mean, we run programs, teaching programs, education programs, and Gary, there's 75 to 150 to 1,000 of our sales associates here in the state of Florida learning everything they have to learn in order to keep
all the time. I know. And it's kind of interesting too. I just kind of, I was looking at the facts that the sellers, they want to sell their house, but they don't want anybody in their house. They don't want the agent in the house. They don't want the home inspector in the house. They don't want the appraiser in the house. They don't want the buyer in the house. And the buyers, they don't want to go in the house either. And typically they're in Manhattan or Chicago or San Francisco, or maybe even Miami, moving up to Broward County. And they're basically asking, I want to see everything I can about the house. And in fact, in the last 7 contracts, Nancy, this is kind of interesting statistic for us. Our buyers never saw the property until the day of walkthrough. Now, they did have virtual tours. They did have Matterports. We had great photography. Chitachi Egu, who's my videographer, who's working with us today on this program, was able to get really unique coverage as far as what it's like to live in the house, what it's like to live in the neighborhood, what it's close to, grocery stores, schools, dry cleaners, beauty salons, that type of thing.
Yeah. And you know what I love? I mean, I remember talking to you early in this and having a conversation with you where you say, we can do that. Of course, we're in the property. We can video it for you. We also have virtual notaries with our title company now. So we've actually closed properties at the walkthrough. There's no reason to put people out. We have the ability to operate virtually. We have apps on our phone now so that the customer can actually do a deposit, because before, years ago, customer had to go into a bank and get a cashier's check to close on the property. None of that is anymore. Everything we do is absolutely virtual. And I've been particularly impressed with how fast your group moved on it, Gary. But your group has been digital tech and high tech for such a long time that I think they just said, oh, good, now everybody's using our fun stuff we've been using for years. And we've been doing now they get to use all of our stuff. So you guys have been amazing.
Thank you very much. So we talked a little bit about the listing agents. What about buyer's agents? What are you seeing throughout Coldwell Banker, the buyer's agents that are really able to get it done? What are some of the winning tactics that you see used?
I think the buyers are doing some of the stuff we talked about, which is obviously videoing the properties so that the consumer doesn't have to come in, exactly when they need to. But I guess the most impressive part is to watch how careful they are with themselves and with the consumer. They have, packs in their car. They have masks in their car. They have sanitary wipes in their car. They have gloves in their car. They have everything they need in order to safely escort a buyer through the property. They understand social distancing. They make sure that everybody's protected when they go in. They listen very carefully to the listing agent and to the seller so they know what the guidelines are for the seller, what the seller's comfortable with in terms of the buyer being in there. Some of them even run behind them and, clean counters and do things like that and really watch out for things. No unnecessary touching. I mean, buyers used to touch everything, Gary.
Everything.
Yeah, now they've learned not to do that. So the safety, I think, is probably the most impressive thing I've seen, is that they're escalating the safety of the consumer and obviously themselves, because the safer they are with themselves, the safer the consumer is that's with them.
So one of the things that we've tried to use in our group, because we get a lot of buyers and they're first-time home buyers, or they're thinking to do, they're trying to do something else, and they want to get a second home, and they go to a home and they see the list price to sale price ratio, and they offer 90% of the list price, and they lose the home. They go to a second home, they get closer to that 100% list price, they lose the home. They go to the third property, they put full price, and they lose their home. So it's pretty discouraging, and it can be very fatiguing to the buyer as far as, how am I going to be able to buy a house in this inventory starved market? And what's a way that we can get around this process? And I want to share with you something that Juan Cabrera on my team and I did with that property in Miami. It was a pretty slick broker in Miami, and it looked like she had the listing and she wanted to have the buyer as well. And I said, Juan, we're not going to have any part of that. We're going to get this deal no matter what. Let's talk your buyer into using an escalation clause, so that no matter what their final offer is, we're going to go in above it. Now, the escalation clause, for those listening, doesn't mean you're going to pay way more than the property is valued at. The buyer actually sets a ceiling as far as how high they're willing to go. Would you like to talk about that? Are you seeing that used a lot now?
You know what? I think you're very progressive. We've certainly suggested it, and it is a very powerful form. You're absolutely correct. It limits the amount. So the buyer is saying, listen, this is the most that I want to pay. But up to that point, you can offer, I'm offering you, say, $500 more than the best offer you've got. So a great example would be, $425,000 listing, and the buyer says, you know what, I would pay $420,000 for that property, so I'm going to put a ceiling of $425,000 on it, but my offer is going in at this point at $415,000, but anywhere between $415,000 and $420,000, you're authorized to, that I'll pay $500 more than the best offer. So an escalation clause is very sophisticated, very excellent tool to use in this market. I also wanted to talk to you. I think it's amazing that you use the 3 properties, because some buyers need to lose 3 properties, Gary, before they understand it. And what buyers need to know today is that if you selected a property and this is the one, it's not a real good idea to play games with it. It's better just to be very straightforward. This is what I want. This is what I agree to pay. They have to look around in the marketplace and see what else they can get for the same money, because sometimes, for example, during an inspection period, something comes up and, they got the seller to a specific price, and then all of a sudden they find out that maybe the roof is going to need some repairs. It's going to cost $500, and everybody lands up getting upset over the transaction, instead of both the buyer and seller looking at it and saying, well, would I have paid $500 more for this? Can I find something else out there that's $420,500 that I like better than this home? So sometimes as they get into the transaction, they get a little bit too involved on the emotional side and land up, losing a really good property that they wish they had gotten. And that always, I know it breaks your heart. It breaks my heart when a buyer doesn't get a property they love.
It breaks my heart too, and it's like the process is called the substitution. What can you get for the same amount of money in a different location, perhaps, or what are you giving up with the pros and cons of each of the houses? Eileen had one particular a millennial who's really pretty savvy. He and his wife knew they were going to stay in Coral Springs, of course, for a couple of years, and they set a limit, and they went for it, and they got it, and they actually and it was not an all cash deal, which was kind of interesting because you always think of all cash wins, but in this particular environment, we won it with a finance deal. We brought money to the table, and the seller was elated, and so was the buyer. So it was a win-win for everybody. So I want to just pause and give a little brief commercial. We haven't mentioned a whole lot about it yet, but Nancy, programs like this, Tuesdays with Gary, we actually archive now on our YouTube channel. And so any of the consumers, our customers, our friends, or family members, anybody in their sphere of influence, we encourage them to go to the Gary Lanham Group South Florida YouTube account. And there you'll find speakers like you and other real estate professionals who come in and talk about doing real estate during the COVID environment and how we can safely protect the customer and ourselves and still get good business done. That's enough of my commercial. I want to move us into some new construction. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Okay. I have to interrupt you because I'm a subscriber. I loved your programs. I always learn something, Gary, because you all always have something that's interesting and cutting edge things. And I have never watched one of your programs where I haven't come away with a little nugget that I could use in my business and my life. So thank you. I think they're great.
Thank you so much. I'll just give you a little preview. Next week, we've got Sheena Benjamin Wise on. She is a divorce attorney. You would think that COVID wreaks havoc with families, and it does. Too much closeness can be lethal. And then after that, the following week, we have Jeff Zebar. Actually, the following week we'll be off. Then after that, after the 14th, I believe, or the 15th, Jeff Zebar will be on, and he'll be talking to us about home offices and how to outfit our homes better so we can work from home, so we can deal with this whole different environmental working environment that we deal with today. But let's go ahead and move into new construction. And before we do, I want to share a project that we've been privileged to work with. It's Urban Village, which is a 90 unit project. There are 50 units already built. We have 50 residents. We have 10 units ready to deliver right now, and we've got another couple of phases where we'll be delivering another 20 or 30 units. Chitachi, if you have that queued up, you wouldn't mind showing it. That's just a simple intro of our product, Nancy. It's at 410 Northeast 36th Street. It's in Oakland Park. It's in an area that Oakland Park is dedicating a lot of resources to. They're building a new library, some new playing fields, some pickleball fields, water features, and we're smack dab in the middle of where all the action is. But in addition to Urban Village, Nancy, what are you seeing in terms of new construction in the Fort Lauderdale area?
Well, let me tell you, before we get off of Urban Village, one of my favorite features of Urban Village is that work from home, where you actually have a separate entrance to get into a room that can be used for a home office. It could be used for a variety of things, and it's zoned correctly for it. I got to tell you, I don't think there's a better product in the marketplace for our new world and how we have all adapted post-COVID. So let's talk a little bit about new construction. One of the things that people may have noticed, but they may not have noticed how significant it is what I call the cranes have quieted. You know, 2 years ago, we saw cranes everywhere, and they were operating every single day, pulling buildings up, breaking ground, and moving on new construction. But if you'll notice, over the last year and a half, the cranes have been quiet. And what that means is that there'll be a 3-year lag, because it generally takes 3 years to get a project up off the ground to completion. So as the next couple of years go on, there could be a significant change in the new construction. And by that, I mean, buyers that are looking right now really might find that this is actually the best time to buy, because we really don't know what the absorption rate is going to be of our current inventory, especially since there's no new construction coming in to compete with it. So I think, new construction has always been king because everybody likes brand new, and it doesn't change. Everyone likes brand new. So new construction is always extremely attractive to buyers. Reselling homeowners, very often have to compete with the new construction, and that's not easy because that house has to look absolutely pristine, like no one ever lived in it. So new construction is always attractive in every marketplace, and your product is very unique, and it's a really good one. It's a good one.
There was a project that Lanham and Associates pitched before we were purchased by Caldwell Banker. It was about probably about 6.5 years ago. It was in South Middle River. It was an old Presbyterian church. We went in with a bunch of investors. We tried to buy it. It was about, I don't know, 5.5, 6 acres in South Middle River off of Northwest 17th Street over there near the tennis club. And basically, I drove by that area just yesterday, and all the land has been cleared. And of course, one of the residents bought it because they thought it was awful that somebody was going to try to develop that piece of property. Now, 6 years later, after he's purchased it, the new owner is D.R. Horton. So D.R. Horton is moving in a big way on the northeast side of Fort Lauderdale. Kind of an interesting story.
You really have to watch new construction because they're running the demographics and they're running the statistics on it. And when a developer chooses to build in a specific area, it's because they're seeing something, and it's good for the consumer to watch because what they're seeing and what they see positive for their builds is also very important to us as a consumer to know.
Well, it's certainly educational with you, Nancy. I always enjoy spending time with you. I really like it when you drop knowledge on us like you've done today. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to thank Chitachi, who's also in a third location. She's running the slideshows here. She keeps us going. She keeps us moving right along. Nancy, how was your experience today?
Oh, I think it was fabulous. It was fabulous. It was seamless. Chitaki, hands, my hat's off to you. You do a really great job, and the flow was very good, and a lot of interesting information. As you said, Gary, anytime I get a chance to talk to you is always a good one.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy. We certainly enjoyed having you. And again, if you didn't see this real time, we'll post it on Facebook later today, so you can go back and take a look at it. And of course, if you miss it today, Curtis in Dallas will be setting it up for the Gary Lanham Group South Florida. It'll be in our archives, and we encourage you to take a look at it there. Again, as we close out the program, I want to remind you that next week we have a special guest as well. We have Sheena Benjamin Wise, who is a divorce attorney, and we'll learn about how families are dealing with living during COVID and some of the changes that are being made. Without further ado, Nancy, thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with you. Chitachi, thank you. And we'll see you next Tuesday.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.